Hi everyone, this is Jared, AC7WH, Backyard Ham Radio. I had an amazingly successful time with my helical antenna last night. I trimmed it for the 80 meter band around 3.8 megahertz, but I have had some fantastic success on the 40 meter band. So last night I had my first real pileup in my whole time as being a ham radio operator, where it was keeping me on my toes because everybody was trying to call me, so to speak. So that was exciting. I really enjoyed it. I was talking for over an hour and I had some nice long QSOs, the way that I especially like them. And it was back to back to back, so that was really nice. In fact, I had one ham radio operator tell me that my signal was the strongest one across his radio screen or radio dial, and so that was encouraging. And then I had another ham tell me that my signal was coming in at 5.9 plus 20, and at least one or maybe two other hams told me that my signal was a 5.9 plus. So obviously that can change depending on where the location was and so forth, but that was really exciting for me because I did such a simple antenna. Check out my previous video about this antenna for more information. Also be sure to check out my video showing what it's like if you're listening to me from out of state. So there are a couple of SDR recordings from the Utah SDR that my brother helped me with. And so I'm here in Winston, Oregon, about 80 miles north of the border with California. So pretty far south down here in Oregon, Western Oregon. And my signal is really getting out well. So those SDR recordings are of what my signal sounded like in Utah on both 80 and 40 meters. So I'll include some links with this video, so be sure to check those out. But in any case, why does this helical antenna work so well? It's so simple, it's so basic. Well, this is what my educated guess would be, or my theory or hypothesis, whatever the official term should be. And that is because I have a quarter wavelength on 80 meters, or nearly half a wavelength on 40 meters of actual wire wound around that PVC pipe in a helix, and then I have the two elevated counterpoise wires that are just coming right off here from the deck. In fact, I'm sitting right about at the spot where that antenna would be, and the un would be about at this point. And then the wires would just be branching off and kind of wrapping around this little yard here. The beautiful scenery back here on this beautiful day is mostly property behind my property. So my actual property, if you've seen my other videos, you know it's nice for what I need, but there's not a lot of extra room for doing ham radio full-size antennas. So I needed to come up with something that worked. And so anyhow, as many ham radio operators do, I decided to get inventive, to research, to get help from other hams and get inspiration from the internet and so forth. And so I took that basically 20 meters of wire, so 61.5 feet approximately of wire, and wrapped it around that PVC, and then about the same length of wire out one side of the deck and same length of wire out the other side of the deck, and made kind of a folded counterpoise setup because I couldn't just go straight out without going past the edge of my property. So why do I think that worked so well? Well, because the wire is there to conduct that RF, and the rest was basically accomplished with the Palstar HF Auto Tuner, and then of course the transceiver feeding into the amplifier. Only about 800 watts. I say only because it's not legal limit. It's barely more than half that. And my compression wasn't extremely high, but I also did get a fantastic audio report. So a lot of good things are happening. So Yaesu FTD X10, Palstar HF Auto, Palstar LA1K, and then running all of that off of a watt cycle 12 volt 100 amp hour battery, and then the mains power for my Palstar amplifier, just 120 volt mains power because I'm not running it at its full capacity. And since I'm not powering the radio and the tuner off of the mains power, I'm just using the battery for that. I'm not overloading that circuit. So it worked out well for me. And really, I think it's just because I've got like the vertical element with the normal mode helical antenna, and then somewhat of a horizontal element with the counterpoise wires. I feel like I'm kind of covering everything, so to speak. Even though there's not a lot of directionality with the antenna, it is a low enough frequency that I'm able to hug the ground and go over that hill back behind me. And of course, a lot of my contacts last night were out that way, which would be down to the south, and there are some more distant hills that way, but still following over the ground and the terrain and so forth with those lower frequencies, I think that gave me a lot of success. But on a side note, even my shorter length, higher frequency 17 meter antenna, where it was just a simple helix on a 2x4, that worked really well for me. Same general idea, the two elevated counterpoise wires, only in that case trimmed for 17 meters at a quarter wavelength. That had a very similar effect where it just seemed like I was just able to bust out those contacts to use the slang there. So anyhow, sometimes it just takes something simple and you can get right on the air. I feel like all of us ham radio operators know that to one extent or another. And I was feeding that with a relatively short length of coax, LMR 400 coax, and then my un from the Palomar engineers. So in any case, it worked really, really well. I contacted multiple hams, and I was able to really put my amplifier through its paces because of those back-to-back contacts. But it did well. The fans came on and kept it cool, and I was very pleased with how everything tuned up. I was able to tune up a 1.03 or so, 1.03 to 1 SWR. In fact, the SWR readout on the amplifier most of the time was saying 1.0 to 1. I did have one little blip where it was sensing a higher SWR just briefly. It could have been the wind. I do get the breeze here quite a bit, and so it could have been blowing around some of my elevated counterpoise wires, or it also seemed like there may have been a switch that was flipped elsewhere in the home at the same time, and that may have just triggered just a brief feedback of something that was showing a false reading on the SWR. But other than that, it was staying nice and low for the entire time of the QSOs, the pile up, everything for over an hour. So I'm really pleased with how it turned out. And in summary, why do I think that helical antenna was so successful? It's got enough wire. It was elevated from the ground so that I'm not losing a lot of extra power through the ground. And with being able to match it and put in high power using the HF Auto tuner and the LA1K amplifier, I was able to make up for the fact that it's not a super high gain antenna or anything like that. And I was able to pull in signals quite well too. So that's my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts and comments on this, and if any of you have ever tried a helix or helical antenna in normal mode, especially with these lower bands like 40 or even 80 meters, maybe even 160, which I tried just a little bit previously. So anyhow, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and this is Jared, AC7WH, Backyard Ham Radio 73.